There is something nobody tells you when you are still in it, still trying, still showing up with the patience and the understanding and the love that felt like it should be enough, but kept not being enough. Nobody tells you that the leaving, the actual real, this is not a threat departure, is the only thing that teaches certain truths. Not because you are withholding them as leverage, because some things about what you were, what you meant, what the connection actually was, those things are simply not visible from inside the dynamic. They only become visible from the outside, from the specific, clarifying vantage point of your absence. This is not about making the avoidant hurt. It is not about the satisfaction of being missed or the validation of being wanted after the fact. It is about something more honest than either of those things. It is about understanding what actually happens in the interior of someone with avoidant attachment when the person they were managing at a careful distance stops being manageable because they are no longer there. 4 things, specific, rooted in the psychology rather than in the hope. Worth understanding whether you just left, whether you left a while ago, or whether you are standing at the edge of the decision right now. The first thing, that consistency was rarer than they realized. While you were there, your consistency was the backdrop. The steady, reliable, this person is here quality of your presence was so constant that it functioned the way all constant things function. It became invisible, not unappreciated in any conscious sense, simply present in the way that things taken for granted are present, without the specific weight and texture and irreplaceable quality that only absence reveals. The avoidance defended life is skilled at taking things for granted, not out of cruelty, out of the specific structural feature of an attachment system that was built around self-sufficiency, around not needing, around the maintenance of a sufficient internal distance from external things that their loss remains theoretically survivable. The system keeps things at the distance required to ensure that losing them does not devastate. Your consistency was kept at that distance, registered at the managed level, appreciated in the managed way, never allowed to accumulate its full weight, because full weight means genuine dependence, and genuine dependence means the architecture is failing. And then you leave, and the consistency disappears, and the avoidance system, which was managing your presence at a comfortable remove, finds itself in the specific disorienting position of managing your absence. The absence is not at a comfortable remove. It is simply present, daily, in the specific shape of what you were, and what you were, in the shape of the absence, turns out to be considerably more substantial than the managed appreciation while you were there communicated. The consistency was extraordinary, not ordinary, not background. The specific rare quality of someone who showed up repeatedly, genuinely, without the management flagging and the warmth receding and the availability developing a ceiling. Someone who was actually there in a way that the defended life's previous experience of relationships had not prepared the system to fully value until it was gone. That understanding that the consistency was rare in a world that more often produces the managed, ceiling present, reset after depth version arrives in the absence, clearly, with the specific weight of something genuinely lost rather than something theoretically forfeited. The second thing, that their avoidance was not neutral. The avoidance system has a specific, self-protective story about the distance it creates. The story varies in its details, but its function is consistent. It frames the avoidance as reasonable, as the appropriate response to circumstances, as the natural expression of someone who simply values independence and needs space and finds intense emotional dynamics overwhelming. Not a pathology, a preference. That story requires a specific condition to remain intact. It requires the person being avoided to remain in place, to continue being present in the dynamic, to continue being the surface against which the avoidance expresses itself. Because while that person is present, the story can point to the dynamic, to its complexity, to the specific qualities of the person that make the distance reasonable, as the justification. You leaving removes the justification's foundation. The dynamic is gone. The person whose needs were too much, or whose intensity was overwhelming, or whose emotional expressiveness required the careful management of distance, that person is gone, and the avoidance is still there, running without its object, generating distance in the empty space where the connection used to be. And in that empty space, something becomes visible that the story was obscuring. The avoidance was not a response to you. It was not the reasonable management of a specific, circumstantially justified intensity. It was the architecture expressing itself. The pre-personal, pre-conscious running since before memory fear response that would have operated the same way with anyone who reached the same threshold of genuine intimacy. The distance was not neutral. It was not the benign preference of someone who values independence. It was the active, ongoing, relationship-shaping cost of a fear that was never examined. A cost paid not abstractly, but specifically by you, in the daily experience of loving someone who was managing you at a careful remove, while the system generated the story that made the managing feel like a reasonable arrangement. That cost becomes visible after you leave, because the avoidant, examining the pattern in the absence of the convenient explanation, encounters it as what it actually is, not a preference, a pattern, not a response to you, a response to intimacy itself. Paid, in this case, with the specific currency of your patience and your consistency, and ultimately your departure. The avoidance was not neutral, it was expensive, and the bill, previously distributed invisibly across the texture of the dynamic, arrives in the absence as a single, legible, specific cost. What the pattern cost, what was forfeited in its service, what the defended life purchased with the distance it created. The third thing, that love without action is not enough. The avoidant felt things. That needs to be said clearly, because the tendency, after the leaving, in the processing of everything the dynamic produced, is to question whether the feeling was real, to wonder whether the warmth was performance and the caring was management, and the whole thing was asymmetrical in a way that makes the investment you made feel naive in retrospect. The feeling was real, the caring was genuine. The avoidant loved you in the specific, particular, constrained by the architecture way that the defended life permits love to exist, which is real love, genuinely, just love that could not find its way fully into action, because the actions that love requires, the showing up, the choosing, the sustained presence, the vulnerability of letting the caring be visible and named and accountable, those actions require the architecture to permit them. And the architecture, running its protection program, kept withholding the permission. So the love existed, in the interior, expressed through the indirect channels, present in the monitoring and the practical attentiveness, and the testing and the retreat after the best moments, real in every way that love is real when it cannot find the direct channel. And after you leave, the avoidant understands something about that love that the feeling itself did not teach while you were there. That love without action is not the same as love with it. That feeling something genuinely and being unable to act on it consistently is not the same as feeling something genuinely and choosing to. That the love in the interior, however real, did not translate into the presence and the consistency in the choosing that would have made it something you could actually build a life on. The feeling was not the relationship. The relationship was what the feeling became when it was acted on, and the acting on was insufficient. Not because the feeling was insufficient, because the architecture kept intervening between the feeling and the action. After you leave, that gap between what was felt and what was done becomes undeniable, not as an accusation from outside, as a recognition from inside. The love was real. The love was not enough. Not because you needed more than love, because love without action is not love you can live inside. That understanding is genuinely painful for an avoidant to arrive at, because it is the recognition that the feeling, which was always genuine, which was always present, was not sufficient protection against the cost of the pattern. That caring about someone does not automatically translate into not hurting them. That the gap between feeling and action can produce real damage regardless of the sincerity of the feeling. The fourth thing, that you are irreplaceable in a specific way, not in the romantic, no one will ever compare way, that would make this a story about the uniqueness of the connection above all others. In a more precise and more honest way, you are irreplaceable in what you specifically provided, the particular combination of genuine presence and patient consistency and honest engagement with the interior rather than the exterior. That specific combination, in the specific form it took in you, with the specific history and depth and quality of attention you brought, that is not a generic thing that another warm, available person will naturally replicate. The defended life, resumed without you, will encounter other people, other connections, other versions of warmth and availability and genuine caring. And some of those connections will be real. Some of them will provide things that are genuinely good. And the specific thing you provided, the seeing of the interior, the patience with the pattern, the consistency through the testing, the genuine curiosity about what was actually there underneath the managed surface, that specific thing will be notable in its absence, not because no one else is capable of those qualities, because you were the person who was bringing them. In the specific, personal, irreplaceable way that any real person brings anything genuinely theirs. The defended life, encountering new connections, will notice what is different, what was specific to you, what the new warmth does not quite replicate. And in that noticing, slow, specific, arriving in the ordinary moments rather than in any dramatic revelation, the irreplaceability becomes concrete, not as a romantic absolute, as a specific, personal, this is what was actually there. Recognition of what existed between you that was genuinely yours and genuinely theirs and genuinely not available anywhere else in the specific form it took between two particular people who got through to each other in the specific ways that you did. That recognition does not always produce action, does not always produce the reaching out or the accountability or the genuine change that the recognition points toward. But it is real. It arrives in the defended interior where the genuine things always arrive eventually when the architecture stops having you to manage. Four things: the rarity of your consistency made visible, the cost of the avoidance recognized as non-neutral, the gap between love and action confronted honestly, the irreplaceability of what you specifically brought understood in its specificity, all four arriving in the absence. In the specific, quiet, nobody announces it way that the most important understandings arrive. Through the daily, embodied, undeniable experience of a life that is missing something it did not adequately value while it was present. That is what is happening in them, right now, at whatever stage of the process their interior is currently navigating. And what is happening in you, what the leaving built, what the departure demonstrated, what you are carrying forward into the genuine life. That is the conversation that continues from here. The four things are landing in them, or beginning to, or sitting in the defended interior, doing the slow, accumulating work that absence does when it is real, and the connection it removed was real. And you are somewhere in your own process, maybe freshly out of it, maybe months in, maybe still deciding. Wherever you are, something brought you back to this, to the question of what they understand now, to the need to know that the leaving mattered, that you were not invisible while you were there, and you are not irrelevant now that you are gone. That need is worth honoring, and it is also worth looking at honestly, because the need to know what they understand after you leave is at some level still an orientation toward them, still the primary attention flowing outward, still the question of whether your departure is producing the right response in the right interior on the right timeline, which is understandable, completely, and also worth noticing. What you understand after you leave, because this tends to get less attention than what they understand. The framework points outward, toward the avoidance reckoning, their interior process, the four things arriving in their defended life. And the person who left is often so focused on what the leaving is doing to them that what the leaving is doing in you goes under-examined. The leaving teaches you things too, specific things. that only become available from the outside. The first is the actual size of what you were carrying. While you were in the dynamic, the carrying was so constant and so normalized that its weight stopped being fully perceptible. The monitoring, the calibrating, the management of your own needs to prevent them from triggering the distance. The ongoing work of reading behavior and decoding signals and maintaining the steadiness that the conditions required. All of it running continuously, consuming the specific irreplaceable resource of your daily attention and energy. Outside it, the weight becomes visible retroactively in the specific lightness that arrives, gradually, unevenly, not all at once, when the carrying stops, in the bandwidth that returns, in the quiet of a mind that is not running the background process of the dynamic, in the days that are simply yours without the management tags. That retroactive visibility of the weight is important information, not as evidence that the connection was not worth the cost. It may have been, it may not have been. That question is separate, as honest data about what the dynamic was actually requiring of you, that the hope-organized version of events was minimizing. The second thing the leaving teaches you is the difference between loving someone and needing the dynamic to continue. These feel identical from inside the dynamic. The love and the need for the dynamic are so thoroughly entangled that separating them seems impossible. The continued investment feels like love because it is love, partly. And it is also partly the conditioning, the intermittent reward, the specific neurological attachment to the pattern rather than only to the person. Outside the dynamic, the entanglement begins to loosen. The love remains real, present, not requiring the dynamic's continuation to be genuine. And the need for the dynamic begins to separate from the love, becomes visible as its own thing. The specific, conditioned hunger for the particular texture of the almost connection that the dynamic provided, which is different from love, which was running alongside the love and sometimes disguising itself as love. Seeing them separately, the love that remains and the conditioned need that is gradually releasing is one of the more clarifying things available on the other side of the leaving, because it tells you something honest about what you were staying for, not only the love, also the pattern. And knowing that is not self-criticism, it is the information required to make genuinely free choices about what comes next. The grief that belongs to this stage, it is not the grief of the initial leaving. That grief had the specific acute quality of something just lost, raw, close, every ordinary moment carrying the reminder of what was recently present. This grief is different, slower, more settled. The grief of someone who has been outside long enough to see the full shape of what was there. Not the hope-filtered version, the actual version, the specific, complicated, genuinely valuable and genuinely insufficient thing that the dynamic was. That seeing, the full shape of it, clearly tends to produce a grief that is both larger and cleaner than the early grief. Larger because it is grieving not only the loss of the person, but the loss of the version of things that the hope was constructing, the future that was being built around the possibility of the dynamic resolving into something different, the specific, vivid, genuinely believed possibility of the choosing finally arriving, and the ceiling finally moving and the connection finally becoming what the best moments suggested it could be. That future was real in the hope. It was genuinely imagined and genuinely wanted and genuinely part of how you were experiencing the present. Grieving, it is not the same as grieving something that never existed. It existed as hope, and hope is real. Losing it is loss. Cleaner because the full shape seen clearly allows the grief to have edges, to be about specific things, rather than the diffuse everything is lost quality of grief that has not yet been able to see what exactly is being mourned. The specific loss of this specific person's specific qualities, the specific loss of what was genuinely real between you, the specific loss of the possibility that was being held. Each of those griefs is specific, has a shape, can be felt and processed and moved through in a way that shapeless grief cannot. Let this grief be what it is at this stage, without rushing it toward the forward motion that is also real and also available, and also not yet fully here. The forward motion will be there, It is already building. It does not require the grief to finish before it begins. They coexist. The grief and the forward motion, both present, both real, both part of the honest experience of someone who loved something genuinely and left it for genuinely good reasons and is now in the specific, unglamorous, necessary process of integrating what happened into the life that continues. What the four things mean for you, not for them, for you. The first thing, that your consistency was rarer than they realized, tells you something about what you bring, about the specific genuine quality of your presence that is worth recognizing not because an avoidant finally recognized it, but because it is actually true. You are consistent. You showed up. That is not a small thing in a world where most people's investment has a ceiling that moves when the cost gets high enough. Yours held. That tells you something about yourself worth knowing. The second thing, that the avoidance was not neutral, tells you something about what you were absorbing, about the specific daily cost of being in a dynamic where one person's fear was being managed at your expense without either of you fully naming it as such. That cost was real. It changed things in you that are worth examining. Not with blame, not toward them, not toward yourself, but with the honest recognition that you were carrying something that was not fully yours to carry. The third thing, that love without action is not enough, tells you something about what you need, not as a revised standard to apply to the next relationship, as the embodied experiential knowledge of what the gap between feeling and action actually costs when you are the person on the receiving end of it. You know that gap now, in your body, not as a concept. And that knowing will inform how you assess what is actually available in any connection going forward, not cynically, honestly. The fourth thing, that you were irreplaceable in a specific way, tells you something about what you are. The particular combination of presence and patience and genuine curiosity and consistent showing up that you brought, that is yours. It is not the product of the dynamic. It is what you brought to the dynamic. It traveled with you into it, and it travels with you out of it. And it belongs to you regardless of whether the avoidant in this situation recognized its value while you were there. That combination, those specific qualities, deserve to go somewhere that can receive them, not hold them at a managed distance, not appreciate them at the level the architecture permits, while the real weight of them is kept carefully out of reach. Actually receive them, let them land, build something real with them. That somewhere exists. It is not this dynamic. It may be this person if they do the work that the four things are pointing toward. It may be somewhere else entirely, but it exists, and it is available to the version of you that did the leaving and survived the grief and is building the genuine life that is the only honest foundation for what comes next. You were real. The connection was real. The leaving was right. The grief is legitimate. The forward motion is coming. All of those things are true simultaneously, without any of them canceling the others. That is where you are. In the complicated, honest, not yet resolved, but genuinely moving place of someone who did something hard and is living inside what the hard thing produces. That place is not comfortable. It is real. And real, even when it is not comfortable, is always better than the particular suspension of something that was never quite fully honest. You are fully honest now, with yourself, about what was there and what it cost and what you are worth and what you are building. That honesty is the whole foundation. Everything else is built on it, and it holds. The leaving is done. The grief is doing its work. The four things are landing in them on their timeline, and the understanding of what the leaving taught you is building on yours. And here is where this conversation can do something genuinely useful, rather than simply adding another layer to a framework that has already been built thoroughly enough. The honest thing at this stage is not more psychology, not another elaboration of what is happening in the avoidance interior, or what the absence is producing in their defended life, or what the reckoning looks like from the inside. That territory has been covered thoroughly across this conversation and across everything that preceded it. The honest thing is simpler and harder. The question of what you are building, not what you are waiting for. what you are building. Because there is a version of the post-leaving period that is genuinely forward-moving. That is using the clarity the leaving produced about what you were carrying, about the gap between love and action, about what your consistency and presence are worth, to build something actual, a life that is primary, that moves in a direction that is yours, that does not require the avoidance reckoning to arrive before it can fully begin. And there is another version that looks like forward motion and is primarily waiting. That is performing the genuine life, while the real attention remains allocated to the question of whether the four things are producing visible change. That is going through the days with the background process still running, still monitoring, still organized, underneath the apparent movement, around the hope of a specific outcome. Both versions feel similar from the inside. That is the difficulty. The genuine forward motion and the performed forward motion have the same surface texture. Both involve activity. Both involve the apparent investment in the life beyond the dynamic. Both produce the look of someone who is healing. The difference is interior, in where the primary attention actually lives, in what the days are actually organized around, in whether the life being built is genuinely the destination or the staging area for an outcome that has not yet arrived. That difference is worth sitting with honestly, not to judge which version you are in, to know, because knowing is what makes the genuine version available. You cannot choose the genuine forward motion over the performed version without first being honest about which one is currently happening. What genuine forward motion looks like at this stage, not the dramatic version, the ordinary one. It looks like days that are primarily about what is actually in them, work that engages you, relationships that are present and reciprocal and not requiring the management of someone else's fear to sustain, interests that are genuinely yours rather than activities filling the space where the dynamic used to be. It looks like the avoidant becoming one thought among several, rather than the organizing center of the day's processing. Not gone from your mind, that is not the standard and not the goal. One thought among several, present when present, not running continuously underneath everything else. It looks like the grief arriving and being felt and moving through rather than being suppressed into the performance of okayness or inflated into the ongoing proof that the connection was significant. The grief is significant. It does not need to be inflated to be honored. It can simply be felt when it arrives and moved through when it moves. And it looks like genuine openness to what the life is actually offering, not as the replacement for the avoidant, as the thing itself, the people and the work and the directions that are genuinely available in the actual, present, forward-moving life that is actually yours. That openness is worth protecting, specifically from the two things that most reliably close it at this stage. The first is the hope that keeps the attention primarily on the avoidance interior process, on the four themes and whether they are producing movement, on the reckoning and whether it is completing, on the return and whether it is coming. That hope, however understandable, is the primary competitor with genuine openness to the life. It occupies the space that the openness needs. As long as the primary attention is on what is happening in them, it is not available for what is actually present in the life. The second is the premature closing of the heart that sometimes follows significant relational pain. The specific, understandable, self-protective tendency to treat the leaving as evidence that genuine connection is not available or not worth the cost. That the love was real and it was not enough, and therefore something about the enterprise of loving fully is flawed, rather than something about this specific dynamic being insufficient. That conclusion is the wound turning into a wall, and the wall is understandable, and it will not serve the genuine life or the genuine connections that are available to it. The leaving was right. The connection was genuinely insufficient in specific ways. Neither of those things is evidence that loving fully is the problem. The loving fully was never the problem. It was the only thing that was entirely right throughout. What? You take forward the consistency. It is yours. It always was. It was not produced by the dynamic, and it is not diminished by the dynamic's end. The specific quality of your presence, The genuine showing up, the patient engagement, the honest caring traveled with you into the relationship, and it travels with you out of it. The knowledge of what love without action costs, not as bitterness, as discernment, the embodied, experiential, in the body knowledge of the difference between a connection that feels real and a connection that is also showing up. That distinction is now part of your perceptual equipment in a way it was not before. It will inform how you read connections going forward, without requiring you to become defended or suspicious. Just discerning. The difference between those two things is worth preserving. The grief, which is not a liability, it is the evidence of genuine investment, of having loved something real fully enough that its absence costs something real. People who do not grieve connections did not fully inhabit them. Your grief is the proof of your presence. It is worth carrying honestly rather than rushing past. And the specific, hard-won, experiential knowledge that you can leave, that the attachment does not make you captive, that love is not sufficient reason to remain in conditions that are not meeting you, that you are capable of choosing yourself even when choosing yourself is the harder thing. That knowledge is permanent. It is in your body now. It changes how you move through every relationship going forward, not by making you less willing to love fully. You will love fully. It is who you are. By making you capable of the specific discernment that full love without self-abandonment requires. The avoidant is understanding four things after you leave. You are understanding something too, something that does not have a number, that cannot be reduced to a list. You are understanding yourself more completely than before. Through the most honest available method, the actual, lived experience of loving something genuinely and leaving it when leaving was right, and surviving what the leaving cost, and building something real from what the surviving produced. That understanding is the whole inheritance of the dynamic, not the wound, not the wisdom about avoidant attachment, not the framework or the psychology or the hard-won discernment. You, known to yourself, more fully, more honestly, more permanently. That is what you take forward into the life that is actually yours, which is already here, which has been here throughout, which is worth being fully in right now, not after the reckoning arrives. Now, that is the whole part. Here is what is true at this stage, not the next layer of framework, not the elaboration of what the avoidant is processing, or what you are building, or what the leaving is teaching both of you simultaneously. That territory has been covered honestly and thoroughly, and adding more to it serves the content more than it serves you. What is true at this stage is simple and worth saying plainly. You already know what you need to know. Not everything about avoidant attachment psychology. That knowledge is genuinely useful, and you have it now. But everything you need to make the next real decision about your own life, you have that. It has been in you throughout this entire arc. The frameworks clarified it, the understanding named it, but the knowing was always yours. The question of what comes next for you is not a psychology question. It is a life question. And life questions are not answered through more understanding of someone else's attachment system. They are answered through the simple, direct, sometimes frightening act of living in the direction of what you actually know. What you actually know. You know what the connection cost, not the framework version of the cost. The actual, specific, this is what it took from my daily life cost. You felt it while you were in it, and you are feeling its absence now, and both of those experiences gave you accurate information. You know what you brought, the consistency and the patience and the genuine presence and the full, real, not managed down love. You know its quality, not because the avoidant recognized it adequately. They may not have while you were there, because you lived it. You know what you gave. You know what was missing, not in the vague something was always off way, specifically, the choosing that did not come, the consistency that had a ceiling, the directness that kept finding itself expressed through every channel except the direct one, the future that stayed theoretical. You know what was actually there and what was actually absent, and you know, somewhere underneath the grief and the hope and the understandable desire for the reckoning to produce something visible, that your life is happening right now. Not after the avoidant finishes understanding the four things, not after the architecture loosens and the choosing arrives and the connection becomes what the best moments suggested it could be. Right now, today, in the specific, ordinary, forward-moving reality of a Tuesday that belongs to you. The only thing left to do, live it. Not as a consolation for what did not work out, not as the healthy behavior that positions you optimally for the eventual return, not as the forward motion that produces the reckoning, that produces the change, that produces the relationship finally functioning. Just live it, because it is yours, because it is happening whether or not you are present in it, because the days are going whether or not you are actually in them. The grief is part of it. Bring the grief, it is honest, and it belongs. The love that remains is part of it. Bring that too. It is real, and it does not require the dynamic to continue in order to be genuine. But bring yourself, primarily, into the actual, present, forward-moving life that has been here throughout. That was here before the dynamic and is here after it, and was never actually suspended by it, only partly attended to while the primary attention was elsewhere. Come back to it fully, not because the avoidant is watching, not because the full inhabiting produces the right impression, not because this is the version of you that is hardest to walk away from, or most likely to trigger the realization or best positioned for whatever comes next. Because it is your life. That is the whole reason. That is always the whole reason. The four things the avoidant understands after you leave are real. They matter. The understanding is happening. And the one thing you understand after you leave, the thing that has been building across every part of this conversation, and every script before it, and every honest moment of sitting with what was real and what was not, and what it cost and what it gave, is this: your life is worth being in, fully, without waiting for permission from anyone else's reckoning. That was always true. Go live it.